Thank you, Senator Rono. Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I enjoyed the opportunity to meet with Judge Jackson in person several weeks ago. I found our exchanges here on the committee after almost an hour of questioning to be very substantive and very thorough, and based on the answers that I heard from her then and in response to my other colleagues, I can say definitively that I like her. I think she's a good person, but I cannot support her, and I want to say a word or two as to why. We heard from her. She told me this actually when we sat down together in our meeting, and she said it again under oath, that she has no particular judicial philosophy. She's said in response to questions that she has no view on whether or not people have natural rights. Curious. She told Senator Blackburn she can't define what a woman is, but the one thing that she seemed to be very comfortable saying quite definitively is that she thinks the U.S. federal sentencing guidelines for criminals are too harsh. She said it repeatedly here under oath. We've talked about it at length. Her record reflects it. And I just want to say that I agree with my Democrat colleagues on this point at least. When it comes to a judicial philosophy, it probably is true that the best way to ascertain a nominee's judicial philosophy is to look at their record. And for days, that is exactly what we have done. I sat with the nominee and went through 55 pages of transcripts in her cases. We talked about multiple cases. Other senators questioned her on this score as well, and when you look at her record in depth, her consistent policy position is that the federal sentencing guidelines are outdated, they are outmoded, they are too harsh, and that criminals in general are oversentenced. And I just have to say, I couldn't disagree with her more. You know, she's very clear in her cases, and I commend the transcripts of her cases to everyone who is interested. If you read the transcripts of her cases, when she sentences criminals, and particularly in the child pornography cases that we've discussed so much, she routinely says that she has significant policy disagreements with the federal sentencing guidelines. She's very open about this. I mean, this isn't a secret. She's very open about it. And again, it's very clear in the child pornography cases in particular. This is why in 100% of those cases where she had discretion, 100% of the time, she sentenced below the federal sentencing guidelines, below the prosecutor's recommendations, and we now know, frequently, below what the probation office confidentially recommended. In the Hawkins case, in the Sears case, in the Kane case, in the Hilley case, we now know she recommended below or sentenced below what even the probation office recommended in their confidential reports to her, and she did it based on policy. And for me, this is very key. This is a very thoughtful person. Judge Jackson is not someone who's just wandered in here. She's very accomplished. She's very thoughtful. She was on the bench for 10 years, has been on the bench for 10 years, served on the Sentencing Commission before that. She's given these issues a great deal of thought. And I think that her views on these issues as it relates to sentencing and criminal justice are very well considered. I just disagree with them very fundamentally. Here's the policy that she discussed with us and that she has repeatedly discussed in her cases. She says that she disagrees on principle. When it comes to these child pornography cases, the criminals should be getting a higher sentence based on the number of images they possess. That's what the guidelines say. You should get a higher sentence based on the number of images. She repeatedly says, for the record in these cases, and she said it here to this committee, to me, to Senator Graham, to Senator Cruz and others, that she thinks that that is wrong as a matter of policy. I think that that is fundamentally mistaken. The more images there are, the worse the crime is. The number of children being sexually exploited and images made of child sexual exploitation isn't decreasing, it's exploding. In 2019, the New York Times reported after an investigative survey that there were 45 million images of children being sexually exploited on the internet. Last year, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children said that number was up to 85 million. 45 to 85 in the space of just 2 or 3 years. I just disagree with Judge Jackson when she says that we shouldn't be sentencing criminals based on the number of images they possess. I think in this age, in this set of circumstances, she's fundamentally wrong and the guidelines are right. She says that she disagrees on principle with the enhancement for using the computer, using the internet. She made that very clear. She says it in the cases over and over. Fair enough, but I think she's wrong. In an age when child exploitation is driven by these images that are exploited, are distributed through the internet, through computers, to set aside computer use as a reason to give a higher sentence, to ignore the guidelines on this, I think is a mistake. I think it is a very fundamental mistake. She said that she doesn't give enhancements based on the sadistic nature of the images. She said that over and over in the cases we looked at. In the Hawkins case, she says it. In the Cooper case, she says it. I also think that that is fundamentally mistaken as a matter of substantive policy. I do think that if you have a criminal defendant who possesses images that are sadistic in nature, where children, babies, are being sadistically sexually abused, that person ought to spend more time in jail. I do think that is worse than a criminal of another variety, of another type. And I'm not the only one. Prosecutors, including a prosecutor who testified to us 2 weeks ago, who are experts in human trafficking, have made the same point. This prosecutor who was before us here on the committee, she spent 18 years prosecuting these crimes. Her testimony was an offense that involves a computer is worse than an offense that involves the mail. An offense that involves more images is worse than an offense that involves fewer. An offense that involves young children is worse than an offense involving older children. Judge Jackson's view is that we should treat everyone more leniently because more and more people are committing worse and worse child sex offenses. I'd say exactly the opposite is what we should be doing. If more people are committing worse child sex offenses, if there are more images, if the images are more graphic and exploitative in nature, then more people ought to be spending more time behind bars. And here again, I would submit to you that her judicial philosophy on this point is why she is consistently sentenced below not just the guidelines, not just the prosecutors, but as we have seen, the national average in these cases, and even below her colleagues in the D.C. Circuit. And by the way, Judge Jackson's aware of this. If you look at the transcripts of her cases, Judge Jackson, to her credit, by the way, she's very thorough. Judge Jackson frequently will ask the U.S. Sentencing Commission for data on what the averages are for this kind of a crime in other courts and in her court. In the Cooper case, for instance, Judge Jackson, this is another one of the child porn cases, Judge Jackson looked to statistics about the average sentence given to similarly situated defendants. She asked the Sentencing Commission to calculate this. Her own statistics, or really the Sentencing Commission statistics, revealed that she sentenced Cooper, in this case the defendant, to 41 months below the national average. I know that because she knows it. She cites it. It's in the transcript. Here's my point. Judge Jackson, as a matter of policy, sentences below the national averages, below her colleagues, and by the way, the prosecutors know it. Read the transcripts. The prosecutors come into court, and when they appear before her, they say, Judge, we know that you have policy disagreements with the guidelines. We know that you think they over-sentence. We know you think they're too harsh. They know it. They argue with her based on it. Some cases pleading with her, at least give the defendants. In the Hawkins case, this is the 18-year-old who had thousands of images, all those videos of young children. They plead with her, at least give him 2 years. That was below the guidelines. At least give him 2 years. She gave him 3 months. I think this is why, this core judicial philosophy is why we see her doing things like apologizing to some of these offenders, just like she apologized to Wesley Hawkins. She said she was sorry for him. Now listen, I just have to say, I'm not sorry for him. I'm not sorry for these offenders. I am not sorry for the offenses they have committed and where they have gotten themselves to. They should go to jail. They should go to prison. And my fundamental disagreement with Judge Jackson is not based on her character or her integrity or her accomplishments. I think those things are beyond question. It's based on her policy and her philosophy. And I think on these core issues, she is just dead wrong. Now, let me just say this finally in conclusion. We've heard in Judge Jackson's defense, and I don't know it's really much of a defense. I know she didn't say these things, but in her defense by the White House and members of this committee, we've been told things like the child pornography is actually all a conspiracy. It's not real. It's just a conspiracy. It's made up. Let me just say for the record, sex crimes against children are not fiction. They are not a conspiracy. There are 85 million images of children being exploited available on the internet. I'm a former prosecutor. These are real crimes. I'm a father of 3 young children. These are real children. And these aren't victimless crimes. Just because they're images doesn't mean real kids aren't involved. As we heard testimony from prosecutors and experts just 2 weeks ago, child pornography creates a cycle of trafficking, of exploitation, of abuse. It is the children here who are the victims, not the criminals. On that core point, I disagree fundamentally with Judge Jackson. I wish her well, but I cannot support her nomination. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.